how do you make sure that there are not many copies of you out there in the world? This is just one example of, just by creating these new apps that did not exist and just prototyping, and like suddenly you realize like, whoa, this is scary, this is strange. So I'm sure that a lot of other questions arise, and it's really up to the people who are creating these technologies to kind of, take a step back and say, okay, like, is this right? Should we move forward with this, or do we need to think how to make it like better, more secure? Yeah.
Thank you. Just beyond the AR headset and AR camera, like for the future of AR, we like in the future, like 10 or 5 or 10 years from now, what will the future?
You mean beyond headsets?
Yeah, beyond headsets and AR cameras.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure. I feel like the form factor is definitely going to continue to reduce till we end up with contact lenses. I mean, it's definitely heading down that sort of Black Mirror path. It's hard to say, and I think I think that's kind of become apparent during this conversation that like finding those use cases that are of value is like the big question. But I mean, I feel strongly about it. I mean, I definitely think it's going to be like one of the next big computing platforms, but I think like I tend to view it as an enabling technology, and we kind of don't really know what it's going to enable yet, Like to me, I think of it like when the iPhone came out, and they're like, oh, it's a camera and it's a MP3 player and it's like a computer, right? 3 in 1. But they didn't say, oh, it's this thing that's gonna hail Ubers for you and like order your dinner and all of this other stuff. And like that whole app economy sprung out of like these smartphones, right? So it enabled that. And I kind of feel like something like that's gonna happen with AR and VR. Like it's going to enable something else, but we kind of don't really know what it is yet. And I think it's gonna be a lot of maybe independent creators coming up with some of these things once they realize like what they can do in this like spatial environment.
Just to kind of go out there a little bit further, things that are going on in terms of sort of the computer-brain interface, like things like Neuralink and so forth they're working on. I mean, is this really, from an AR, VR standpoint, like completely over the horizon and not something that you think will come into play in that sort of 5-10 year time frame that you guys are looking at? Or do you think that the way that your technology is evolving, the pace that it's evolving at, that these things will at some point sort of merge or even become necessary in order to make like the AR VR experience more accessible and more ubiquitous than it could be otherwise?
I absolutely love the work that the Neuralink guys are doing. And I do see a path going forward where those two things necessarily link, right? If you think about it in a way, we are really slow. I think the fastest we can be in interacting with a computer is what we can do in a keyboard, which is about 80 words per minute. And that's still very slow. And if you are in mobile, I think the best mobile keyboard or professional typers in mobile can do about 30 words per minute. And if you go down into AR, when you are typing on some sort of spatial interface, either with a controller or with your hands, you are really down at around 15 words per minute, and that's after heavy training. So what that means is two things. So in the interim, the laptop, the desktop is not going away because the throughput capacity between the device and the human is much higher than anything else. That also means that voice interfaces become more relevant, more important, especially if you are in AR and you're looking at something, it's just natural. But it also sets the stage for the complete validation of the Neuralink approach. So I don't know if they will succeed. I don't know if what does AR world feels like in your brain? So they're starting with this idea where you can control artificial limbs, and you are gonna feel it like a limb. You are gonna feel this artificial limb the same way you feel your leg. So what does your headset or the information in your headset feels like in your brain when you have a Neuralink device into you? Or what does a keyboard string of commands feels like in your brain? I don't think there are answers to this, right? So we'll see. I do think there is a marriage made in heaven for these technologies, but I do think that it's going to take way more than the time that they have announced. It's not a 5-year thing. It's not a 10-year thing. It's a new thing.
But I think even if that technology is far away, I mean, we didn't really touch on it, but you just mentioned voice, and I do think that the AR and VR experiences are becoming a lot more immersive now, because we're sort of having these other input modalities like voice and also eye tracking. I mean, if any of you have used any kind of headset that involves eye tracking, I mean, you can like look at something and it like, the little cursor is like right there on the thing, and it's and then there are other things where you can kind of just like blink a certain way or like move your eyes a certain direction. It manipulates, the interface, and it's almost magical. Like it feels like it's reading your mind, right? So I think we have some experiences that are kind of heading down that path already. So
I see personally, I think like one of the biggest use cases could be in like the healthcare field for AR and VR, but like I had done research with doctors and professionals, and they're actually more resistant to this because of HIPAA laws and data security and like giving security and like issues of that, and I guess also patients like being okay with giving their information. Like how do you were saying like convince people, like how do you get that buy-in to show that like this actually can better your overall health, but there's going to be that pushback of this fear of the unknown with data being broken into and everything else.
yeah, I mean, that's kind of an interesting one, and I guess again it comes down to like the use case being so compelling that like people feel like that's the best option. So I mean, if we do see like there's the use case of like people using it in surgery, right? Like to sort of see where veins are or see where to make decisions and things like that. And in certain circumstances, doctors are like looking at a monitor while they're operating on a patient because like they have cameras in the patient, and then they're sort of looking at a screen rather than looking at the patient. And so using AR, you could be looking at the patient. Now, I do understand that they might just be like, we'll just look at the screen because we don't want to deal with the privacy issues. But if you're teaching students, or if you're doing sort of like almost like a remote assist where you have some sort of health expert, like you're in a rural village or a small town, and you don't necessarily have the expertise on hand, could you have someone remotely assisting? We did a project with like a team from NASA where we were looking at like astronaut health, and like if you're sending people to like Mars, right? Like how do you monitor patient health and do that kind of thing? And so that like there are use cases where like you're just not going to have every kind of specialist on the moon or on Mars that you might possibly need, and so there are going to be instances where you need to monitor patients remotely and have people assisting with procedures from another place. And so AR has like maybe some place there, and I'm sure with like the government, like they have their ways of keeping secrets. So
hi, I wanted to ask about the iterative process. So you said there isn't really a set guidelines for patterns for design. Is there anything that you found that has streamlined this process working with developers and designers? Like, do you go from mocking up something in cardboard, testing that, and then putting it in Unity right away?
So, no, there's not. So let me tell you, like this AR walking navigation, the design process for that project consisted in building 150 prototypes of what that would look like. So, yeah, at this stage where we are, it's just being defined. Of course, we borrow from, from whatever we've been doing as designers for many years. But when it comes to that, right now, it's build, 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 build. Yeah. Sorry.
Did you want to?
No, I agree, 100%, yeah.
This might be actually kind of somewhat on a similar line, but do you guys have any like system or methods when approaching like, say like AR fatigue, like whether it's just having to hold it up or like the colors that are always presented, like is there any method or that you've like already created when approaching these things? So that
Where there's this guy in Capilla Ramos Herol who no, that fatigue is a very important thing here, and I did a lot of research on that too, and so one of the most important things that we realized there is that there is no way to measure fatigue, but it is such an important thing. So we actually did sort of like initial steps in measuring that. Like we don't really have a language for talking about fatigue, right? What is it like? Is it a scale, and how do you create it? There are a lot of subjective scales in which you can create fatigue. You have the Borg scale, you have the famous NASA TLX scale, but they are subjective in nature, meaning that they are prone to a lot of noise. The noise versus signal ratio is very high. In particular, in terms of fatigue and hand-based interaction, what we've learned is that if you don't use gestures a lot, I think the word that friend of mine used is parsimoniously use gestures, meaning just use them once in a while when it is absolutely necessary. This idea of doing the click like this, it is good for a demo, but it's not good in the long term. And try to keep things closer to you. If the user is to interact with something, try to keep that content close to the user so that the arms are in a resting position, like this. That works very well for VR. It doesn't work that well for AR because of the narrow field of view, and the people have to lower their heads like this. And then the other problem is that they don't have fatigue in their arms, but they have fatigue in their neck. So, it's a very complex problem. It's an active balance in the part of the designer, and the only way to go about it is prototype. Yes.
I think with fatigue, so when you're asking about fatigue, I think it's mostly like discomfort. And then like, where does this discomfort come from? Does this discomfort come from wearing a headset which is heavy? Does this discomfort come from the IPD not being calibrated? Does this discomfort come from the inputs? Like this kind of fatigue, or what I think what you refer to more as discomfort, can come from many different areas, and trying to solve for that is not simple. Questions?
I think last question. You will
Yep.
choose wisely.
So, what do the panelists think of the interaction designs, interaction techniques that Microsoft's come up with for HoloLens 2?
Nice, yes. You mean like to make it bigger and smaller and stuff like that, like this 3D object manipulation with your
Well,
hands?
also, going all in on gestures,
Yeah.
voice interaction, and eye tracking and head tracking as well.
Yes. My answer to that is absolutely you need to have that. Like, you cannot have a headset and not have a headset for an immersive interaction and not be responsive to your hands. It just feels weird that nothing happens when you put your hand through this thing. It needs to be there. As a capability, it has to be there. Now, will the interaction design of the app depend solely on gesture interface or on voice interface? That I'm more skeptical there. I think there needs to be depends on the use case, depends on where it's gonna be used. It's a designer exercise, right? If you are gonna be using it outdoors, you probably don't want to rely on voice because a lot of the environmental sound is gonna be a problem, or people talking around you, or it's just weird, like this guy talking, So yes, as capabilities, it has to be there. And I praise Microsoft. I think they've done a really good job. Now it is the job of the designers to find the right balance on how to use these, how to better use these.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think any kind of progress we make as far as the hardware goes is great, but at the end of the day, it comes down to what you're designing, and sort of you're always picking and choosing the right elements for your particular software, right? So.
Yeah, I actually think what they're doing is super interesting, and I'm actually super interested in seeing what they come up with, because making this change of using your hands to interact, having direct manipulation, it's a huge difference than just using discrete gestures. And the way that you design for that is certainly different, because when users, and I'm sure you've experienced that as well, when you do user testing, the first thing users want to do is try to grab holograms. Like they try to reach out and grab, and so to use that for your interface, like for designing your interface, that's a huge change, and it's a huge change for Microsoft in general. So I think it's really great that they've gone and done this. I think it will be really interesting to see how they progress from there.
All right, guys, that wraps it up.
Thank
Let's
you
thank
so
everyone.
much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Did you know like what time? Yeah.
Thank you guys.
No, but I want to buy one.